The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Volume 1, Cosmogenesis. Part 1, Cosmic Evolution, 7 stanzas translated with commentaries from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 6, continued. 5. At the fourth round or revolution of life and being around the 7 smaller wheels, the sons are told to create their images. 1/3 refuses. 2/3 obey. The full meaning of this sloka can be fully comprehended only after reading the detailed additional explanations, Anthropogenesis and its commentaries in Book 2. Between this sloka and the last, sloka 4 in the same stanza, extend long ages, and there now gleams the dawn and sunrise of another aeon. The drama enacted on our planet is at the beginning of its 4th act, but for a clear comprehension of the whole play, the reader will have to turn back before it can proceed onward, for this verse belongs to the general cosmogony given in the archaic volumes, whereas Book 2 will give a detailed account of the creation, or rather the formation of the first human beings, followed by the second humanity, and then by the third, or as they are called, the first, second, and the third root races. As the solid earth began by being a ball of liquid fire, of fiery dust, and its protoplasmic phantom, so did man. That which is meant by the qualification the fourth is explained as the 4th round, only on the authority of the commentaries. It can equally mean 4th eternity as a 4th round, or even the 4th hour globe. For, as will repeatedly be shown, it is the 4th sphere on the 4th or lowest plane of material life, and it so happens that we are in the 4th round, at the middle point of which the perfect equilibrium between spirit and matter had to take place. Note: it was, as we shall see, at this period, during the highest point of civilization and knowledge, as also of human intellectuality, of the 4th Atlantean race, that, owing to the final crisis of physiologico-spiritual adjustment of the races, humanity branched off into its 2 diametrically opposite paths, the right and the left-hand paths of knowledge, or avidya. Thus were the germs of the white and the black magic sown in those days. The seeds lay latent for some time, to sprout only during the early period of the 5th hour race. From commentary. End of note. Says the commentary explaining the verse, the holy youths, the gods, refuse to multiply and create species after their likeness, after their kind. They are not fit forms, rupas, for us. They have to grow. They refuse to enter the kayas, shadows or images, of their inferiors. Thus had selfish feeling prevailed from the beginning, even among the gods, and they fell under the eye of the karmic lipikas. They had to suffer for it in later births. How the punishment reached the gods will be seen in the 2nd volume. Stanza 6 continued. 6. The curse is pronounced. They will be born in the 4th race, suffer and cause suffering. This is the first war. The curse is pronounced. It is a universal tradition that, before the psychological fall, propagation of one's kind, whether human or animal, took place through the will of the creators or of their progeny. It was the fall of spirit into a generation, not the fall of mortal man. It has already been stated that to become a self-conscious spirit, the latter must pass through every cycle of being, culminating in its highest point on earth in man. Spirit per se is an unconscious negative abstraction. Its purity is inherent, not acquired by merit. Hence, as already shown, to become the highest Dhyankochan, it is necessary for each ego to attain to full self-consciousness as a human, that is, conscious being, which is synthesized for us in man. The Jewish Kabbalists arguing that no spirit could belong to the divine hierarchy unless ruach, spirit, was united to Nefesh, living soul, only repeat the Eastern esoteric teaching. A dhyani has to be an Atma Buddhi, once the Buddhimanas breaks loose from its immortal Atma, of which it, Buddhi, is the vehicle. Atman passes into non-being, which is absolute being. This means that the purely nirvanic state is a passage of spirit back to the ideal abstraction of beingness, which has no relation to the plane on which our universe is accomplishing its cycle. They will be born in the fourth race, suffer and cause suffering. The curse is pronounced does not mean, in this instance, that any personal being, God or a superior spirit, pronounced it, but simply that the cause which could but create bad results had been generated, and that the effects of a karmic cause could lead the beings that counteracted the laws of nature, and thus impeded her legitimate progress, only to bad incarnations, hence to suffering. This is the first war. There were many wars refers to several struggles of adjustment, spiritual, cosmical, and astronomical, but chiefly to the mystery of the evolution of man as he is now. Powers, pure essences, that were told to create, is a sentence that relates to a mystery explained as already said elsewhere. It is not only one of the most hidden secrets of nature, that of generation, of whose solution the embryologists have vainly put their heads together, but likewise a divine function that involves that other religious or rather dogmatic mystery, the fall of the angels, as it is called. Satan and his rebellious host would thus prove, when the meaning of the allegory is explained, to have refused to create physical man only to become the direct saviors and the creators of divine man. The symbolical teaching is more than mystical and religious. It is purely scientific, as will be seen later on. For instead of remaining a mere blind, functioning medium, impelled and guided by a fathomless law, the, quote, rebellious, unquote, angel claimed and enforced his right of independent judgment and will, his right of free agency and responsibility, since man and angel are alike under karmic law. Note: explaining Kabbalistic views, the author of the New Aspects of Life says of the fallen angels that, according to the symbolical teaching, spirit, from being simply a functionary agent of God, became volitional in its developed and developing action, and, substituting its own will for the divine desire in its regard, so fell. Hence the kingdom and reign of spirits and spiritual action, which flow from and are the product of spirit volition, are outside and contrasted with, and in contradiction to, the kingdom of souls and divine action. So far, so good. But what does the author mean by saying, when man was created, he was human in constitution, with human affections, human hopes and aspirations? From this state he fell into the brute and savage. This is diametrically opposite to our Eastern teaching, and even to the Kabbalistic notion so far as we understand it, and to the Bible itself. This looks like corporealism and substantialism coloring positive philosophy, though it is rather hard to feel quite sure of the author's meaning. See page 235. A fall, however, from the natural into the supernatural and the animal, supernatural meaning the purely spiritual in this case, means what we suggest. End of note. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought, and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. The Kabbalistic version of the same story is given in the Codex Nazareus, the scripture of the Nazarenes, the real mystic Christians of John the Baptist and the initiates of Christos. Bahagzivu, the father of the genii, is ordered to construct creatures, to create. But as he is ignorant of Orcus, he fails to do so, and calls in Phaethahil, a still purer spirit, to his aid, who fails still worse. This is a repetition of the failure of the fathers, the Lords of Light to fail one after the other. Book 2, Sloka 17. We will now quote from our earlier volumes. Then steps on the stage of creation the spirit of the earth, so-called, or the soul, psyche, which St. James calls devilish. The lower portion, the anima mundi, or astral light. See the close of this sloka. Note, and then steps on the stage of creation the spirit. On the authority of Irenaeus, of Justin Martyr, and the Codex itself, Dunlap shows that the Nazarenes regarded spirit as a female and evil power in its connection with our earth. Dunlap, Sod, the Son of Man, page 52, end of note. With the Nazarenes and the Gnostics, this spirit was feminine. Thus the spirit of the earth, perceiving that for Fetahil, the newest man, meaning the latest, the splendor was changed, and that for splendor existed decrease and damage, she wakes Karaptanos, who was frantic and without sense and judgment, and says to him, "Arise, see the splendor," the light, "of the newest man." Fetahil has failed to produce or create man. The decrease of this splendor is visible. Rise up, come with thy mother, the Spiritus, and free thee from limits by which thou art held, and those more ample than the whole world. After which follows the union of the frantic and blind matter, guided by the insinuations of the spirit, not the divine breath, but the astral spirit, which by its double essence is already tainted with matter. And the offer of the mother being accepted, the Spiritus conceives 7 figures, and the 7 stellas, planets, which represent also the 7 capital sins, the progeny of an astral soul separated from its divine source, spirit, and matter, the blind demon of concupiscence. Seeing this, Fetahil extends his hand towards the abyss of matter and says, "Let the earth exist, just as the abode of the powers has existed." Dipping his hand in the chaos which he condenses, he creates our planet. Note on Karaptanos, the spirit of matter and concupiscence. Kamarupa, minus manas, mind. End of note. Note on Fetahil, etc. See Frank's Codex Nazareus, and Dunlap's Sod, the Son of the Man. End of note. Then the Codex proceeds to tell how the Bahak Zivu was separated from the Spiritus, and the Genii or angels from the rebels. Note, see Codex Nazareus, Volume 2, page 233. End of note. Then Manu, the greatest, who dwells with the greatest Ferho, Kol Kebarzivu, known also by the name of Nebatyavar Bar Yufin Ifafin, helm, and vine of the food of life, he being the third life, and commiserating the rebellious and foolish genii, on account of the magnitude of their ambition, says, "Lord of the genii, aeons, see what the genii, the rebellious angels, do, and about what they are consulting." Note on Manu. This Manu of the Nazarenes strangely resembles the Hindu Manu, the heavenly man of the Rig Vedas. End of note. Note on helm and vine of the food of life. I am the true vine, and my father is the husbandman. From John chapter 15, verse 1. End of note. Note on Lord of the Genii. With the Gnostics, Christ, as well as Michael, who is identical with him in some respects, was the chief of the aeons. End of note. Note on what the genii and rebellious angels do. See Codex Nazareus, Volume 1, page 135. End of note. They say, "Let us call for the world, and let us call the powers into existence." The genii are the principles, the sons of light, but thou art the messenger of life. Note, from the same source, meaning Codex Nazareus. And in order to counteract the influence of the 7 badly disposed principles, the progeny of Spiritus, Cabarazio, the mighty Lord of Splendor, produces 7 other lives, the cardinal virtues, who shine in their own form and light from on high, and thus re-establish the balance between good and evil, light and darkness. Note on shine in their own form and light from on high. See the cosmogony of Pherecydes. End of note. Here one finds a repetition of the early allegorical dual systems, as the Zoroastrian, and detects a germ of the dogmatic and dualistic religions of the future, a germ which has grown into such a luxuriant tree in ecclesiastical Christianity. It is already the outline of the two, quote, supremes, unquote, God and Satan, but in the stanzas no such idea exists. Most of the Western Christian Kabbalists, preeminently Eliphas Levi, in their desire to reconcile the occult sciences with church dogmas, did their best to make of the astral light only and preeminently the pleroma of early church fathers, the abode of the hosts of the fallen angels, of the archons and powers. But the astral light, while only the low aspect of the absolute, is yet dual. It is the anima mundi, and ought never to be viewed otherwise, except for Kabbalistic purposes. The difference which exists between its light and its living fire ought to be ever present in the mind of the seer and the psychic. The higher aspect, without which only creatures of matter from that astral light can be, is this living fire, and it is the 7th principle. It is said in Isis, in a complete description of it, quote, the astral light or anima mundi is dual and bisexual. The ideal male part of it is purely divine and spiritual. It is the wisdom. It is spirit or purusha, while the female portion, the spiritus of the Nazarenes, is tainted in one sense with matter, is indeed matter, and therefore is evil already. It is the life principle of every living creature, and furnishes the astral soul, the fluidic perisprit, to men, animals, fowls of the air, and everything living. Animals have only the latent germ of the highest immortal soul in them. This latter will develop only after a series of countless evolutions, the doctrine of which evolution is contained in the Kabbalistic axiom: a stone becomes a plant a beast a man a spirit, and the spirit a god. Volume 1, page 301, note. And unquote. The 7 principles of the Eastern initiates had not been explained when Isis was written, but only the 3 Kabbalistic phases of the semi-exoteric Kabbalah. Note. They are found, however, in the Chaldean Book of Numbers. End of note. But these contain the description of the mystic natures of the first group of the Ankochans in the Regimen Ignis, the region and rule or government of fire, which group is divided into 3 classes, synthesized by the first, which makes 4, or the Tetractys. See comments on stanza 7, book 1. If one studies the comments attentively, he will find the same progression in the angelic natures, meaning from the passive down to the active, the last of these beings being as near to the ahamkara element, the region or plane wherein egoship, or the feeling of I amness, is beginning to be defined, as the first ones are near to the undifferentiated essence. The former are rupa incorporeal, the latter rupa corporeal. In Volume 2 of Isis, page 183 et sequens, the philosophical systems of the Gnostics and the primitive Jewish Christians, the Nazarenes and the Ebionites, are fully considered. They show the views held in those days outside the circle of Mosaic Jews about Jehovah. He was identified by all the Gnostics with the evil rather than with the good principle. For them he was Ildabaut, the son of darkness, whose mother, Sophia Akamot, was the daughter of Sophia, the divine wisdom, the female Holy Ghost of the early Christians, Akasha, while Sophia Akamot personified the lower astral light or ether. Note. The astral light stands in the same relation to Akasha and Anima Mundi as Satan stands to the deity. They are one and the same thing seen from 2 aspects, the spiritual and the psychic. the super-ethereal or connecting link between matter and pure spirit, and the physical. See for the difference between nous, the higher divine wisdom, and psyche, the lower and terrestrial. St. James, chapter 3, verses 15 to 17. Vide, Demon est Deus inversus, part 2 of this volume. End of note. Ildabaut, or Jehovah, is simply one of the Yelachim, the 7 creative spirits, and one of the lower Sephiroth. Note, Ildabaut is a compound name made up of Ilda, a child, and Baut, both from the Hebrew word for the egg, and Baut, meaning chaos, emptiness, void, or desolation, or the child born in the egg of chaos, like Brahma. End of note. He produced from himself 7 other gods, stellar spirits, or the lunar ancestors, for they are all the same. Note, Jehovah's connection with the moon in the Kabbalah is well known to students. End of note. Note on all the same. About the Nazarenes, see Isis Volume 2, page 131 and 132. The true followers of the true Christos were all Nazarenes and Christians, and were the opponents of the later Christians. End of note. They are all, in his own image, the spirits of the face, and the reflections, one of the other, and have become darker and more material as they successively receded from their originator. They also inhabit 7 regions disposed like a ladder, as its rungs slope up and down the scale of spirit and matter. Note, Vide supra, the diagram of the lunar ring of 7 worlds, where, as in our or any other chain, the upper worlds are spiritual, while the lowest, where the moon, earth, or any planet, is dark with matter. End of note. With pagans and Christians, with Hindus and Chaldeans, with the Greek, as with the Roman Catholics, with the slight variation of the texts in their interpretations, they all were the genii of the 7 planets, as of the 7 planetary spheres of our septenary chain, of which Earth is the lowest. See Isis, Volume 2, page 186. This connects the quote stellar unquote and quote lunar unquote spirits with the higher planetary angels, and the Saptarishis, the 7 rishis of the stars of the Hindus, as subordinate angels, messengers to these rishis, the emanations on the descending scale of the former. Such, in the opinion of the philosophical Gnostics, were the god and the archangels now worshipped by the Christians. The quote fallen angels unquote, and the legend of the war in heaven is thus purely pagan in its origin and comes from India via Persia and Chaldea. The only reference to it in the Christian canon is found in Revelations 12, as quoted a few pages back. Thus, quote Satan unquote, once he ceases to be viewed in the superstitious, dogmatic, unphilosophical spirit of the churches, grows into the grandiose image of one who made of terrestrial a divine man, who gave him, throughout the long cycle of Mahakalpa, the law of the spirit of life, and made him free from the sin of ignorance, hence of death. See the section on Satan in Part 2, Volume 2. Stanza 6 continued. 6. The older wheels rotated downward and upward. Here, having finished for the time being with our side issues, which, however they may break the flow of the narrative, are necessary for the elucidation of the whole scheme, the reader must return once more to cosmogony. The phrase older wheels refers to the worlds or globes of our chain as they were during the previous rounds. The present stanza, when explained esoterically, is found embodied entirely in the Kabbalistic works. Therein will be found the very history of the evolution of those countless globes which evolve after a periodical pralaya, rebuilt from old material into new forms. The previous globes disintegrate and reappear transformed and perfected for a new phase of life. In the Kabbalah, worlds are compared to sparks which fly from under the hammer of the great architect, Law, the law which rules all the smaller creators. The following comparative diagram, page 200, shows the identity between the two systems, the Kabbalistic and the Eastern. The three upper are the three high planes of consciousness, revealed and explained in both schools only to the initiates. The lower ones represent the four lower planes, the lowest plane being our plane, or the visible universe. These 7 planes correspond to the 7 states of consciousness in man. It remains with him to attune the 3 higher states in himself to the 3 higher planes in cosmos. But before he can attempt to attune, he must awaken the 3, quote, seats, unquote, to life and activity. And how many are capable of bringing themselves to even a superficial comprehension of Atmavidya, spirit knowledge, or what is called by the Sufis Rohani. In section 7th of this book, in subsection 3, the reader will find a still clear explanation of the above in the commentary upon Saptaparna, the man-plant. See also the section of that name in part 2. The mother's spawn filled the whole cosmos. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. Notes. The reader is reminded that cosmos often means, in our stanzas only, our own solar system, not the infinite universe. Note, and there were battles fought between the creators, etc. This is purely astronomical. End of notes. This seed appears and disappears continuously. Here, seed stands for the world germ, viewed by science as material particles in a highly attenuated condition, but in occult physics as spiritual particles, that is, supersensus matter existing in a state of primeval differentiation. Note. To see and appreciate the difference, the immense gulf that separates terrestrial matter from the finer grades of supersensus matter, every astronomer, every chemist and physicist ought to be a psychometer, to say the least. He ought to be able to sense for himself the difference in which he now refuses to believe. Mrs. Elizabeth Denton, one of the most learned, and also one of the most materialistic and skeptical women of her age, the wife of Professor Denton, the well-known American geologist and the author of The Soul of Things, was, nevertheless, one of the most wonderful psychometers some years ago. This is what she described in one of her experiments, with a particle of a meteorite placed on her forehead in an envelope. The lady, not being aware what it contained, said, quote, "What a difference between that which we recognize as matter here and that which seems like matter there. In the one, the elements are so coarse and so angular. I wonder that we can endure it all, much more that we can desire to continue our present relations to it. In the other, all the elements are so refined, they are so free from those great rough angularities which characterize the elements here, that I can but regard that as by so much the more than this, the real existence." Unquote, from Volume 3, pages 345 to 346. End of note. In theogony, every seed is an ethereal organism, from which evolves later on a celestial being, a god. In the quote, beginning, unquote, that which is called, in mystic phraseology, cosmic desire, evolves into absolute light. Now, light without any shadow would be absolute light, in other words, absolute darkness, as physical science seeks to prove. That shadow appears under the form of primordial matter, allegorized, if one likes, in the shape of the spirit of creative fire or heat. If, rejecting the poetical form and allegory, science chooses to see in this the primordial fire mist, it is welcome to do so, whether one way or the other, with the Fohat or the famous force of science, nameless, and as difficult of definition as our Fohat himself. That something caused the universe to move with circular motion, as Plato has it, or, as the occult teaching expresses it, the central sun causes forehead to collect primordial dust in the form of balls, to impel them to move in converging lines, and finally to approach each other and aggregate. From the book of Jan. Being scattered in space, without order or system, the world germs come into frequent collision until their final aggregation, after which they become wanderers, comets. Then the battles and struggles begin. The older bodies attract the younger, while the others repel them. Many perish, devoured by their stronger companions. Those that escape become worlds. Note: when carefully analyzed and reflected upon, this will be found as scientific as science could make it, even at our late period. End of note. We have been assured that there exist several modern works of speculative fancy upon such struggles for life in sidereal heaven, especially in the German language. We rejoice to hear it, for ours is an occult teaching lost in the darkness of archaic ages. We have treated of it fully in Isis Unveiled, and the idea of Darwinian-like evolution, of struggle for life and supremacy, and of the survival of the fittest among the hosts above as the hosts below, runs throughout both the volumes of our earlier work written in 1876. See index in Isis Unveiled, at the words evolution, Darwin, Capilla, battle of life, etc., etc. But the idea was not ours, it is that of antiquity. Even the Puranic writers have ingeniously interwoven allegory with cosmic facts and human events. Any symbologist may discern the astrocosmical allusion, even though he may be unable to grasp the whole meaning. The great wars in heaven, in the Puranas, the wars of the Titans, in Hesiod and other classical writers, the struggles also in the Egyptian legend between Osiris and Typhon, and even those in the Scandinavian legends, all refer to the same subject. Northern mythology refers to it as the Battle of the Flames, the sons of Muspel, who fought on the field of Vigred. All these relate to heaven and earth, and have a double and often even a triple meaning, and esoteric application to things above as to things below. They relate severely to astronomical, theogonical, and human struggles, to the adjustments of orbs and the supremacy among nations and tribes. The struggle for existence and the survival of the fittest reigned supreme from the moment that cosmos manifested into being, and could hardly escape the observant eye of the ancient sages. Hence the incessant fights of Indra, the god of the firmament, with the Asuras, degraded from high gods into cosmic demons, and with Veritri or Ahi, the battles fought between stars and constellations, between moon and planets, later on incarnated as kings and mortals. Hence also the war in heaven of Michael and his host against the dragon, Jupiter and Lucifer, Venus, when a third of the stars of the rebellious host was hurled down into space, and its place was found no more in heaven. As said long ago, this is the basic and fundamental stone of the secret cycles. It shows that the Brahmins and the Tanaim speculated on the creation and development of the world quite in a Darwinian way, both anticipating him and his school in the natural selection of species, the survival of the fittest, and transformation. There were old worlds that perished, conquered by the new, etc., etc. See Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 260. The assertion that all the worlds, stars, planets, etc., as soon as a nucleus of primordial substance in the Laya, undifferentiated state, is informed by the freed principles of a just deceased sidereal body, become first comets, and then suns to cool down to inhabitate worlds, is a teaching as old as the rishis. Thus the secret books distinctly teach, as we see, an astronomy that would not be rejected even by modern speculation, could the latter thoroughly understand its teachings. For archaic astronomy and the ancient physical and mathematical sciences expressed views identical with those of modern science and many of far more momentous import. A struggle for life, as the survival of the fittest in the worlds above, as on our planet here below, are distinctly taught. This teaching, however, although it would not be entirely rejected by science, is sure to be repudiated as an integral whole, for it avers that there are only 7 self-born primordial gods emanated from the Trinitarian One. In other words, it means that all the worlds or sidereal bodies, always on strict analogy, are formed one from the other, after the primordial manifestation at the beginning of the great age is accomplished. The birth of the celestial bodies in space is compared to a crowd or multitude of pilgrims at the festival of the fires. 7 ascetics appear on the threshold of the temple with 7 lighted sticks of incense. At the light of these, the first row of pilgrims light their incense sticks, after which every ascetic begins whirling his stick around his head in space, and furnishes the rest with fire. Thus with the heavenly bodies. A lyre center is lighted and awakened into life by the fires of another pilgrim, after which the new center rushes into space and becomes a comet. It is only after losing its velocity and hence its fiery tail that the fiery dragon settles down into quiet and steady life as a regular, respectable citizen of the sidereal family. Therefore it is said, born in the unfathomable depths of space, out of the homogeneous element called the world soul, every nucleus of cosmic matter, suddenly launched into being, begins life under the most hostile circumstances. Through a series of countless ages, it has to conquer for itself a place in the infinitudes. It circles round and round between dense and already fixed bodies, moving by jerks and pulling towards some given point of center that attracts it, trying to avoid, like a ship drawn into a channel dotted with reefs and sunken rocks, other bodies that draw and repel it in turn. Many perish, their mass disintegrating through stronger masses and, when born within a system, chiefly within the insatiable stomachs of various suns. See commentary to stanza 4. Those which move slower and are propelled into an elliptic course are doomed to annihilation sooner or later. Others moving in parabolic curves generally escape destruction, owing to their velocity. Some very critical readers will perhaps imagine that this teaching, as to the cometary stage passed through by all heavenly bodies, is in contradiction with the statements just made as to the moon being the mother of the earth. They will perhaps fancy that intuition is needed to harmonize the two. But no intuition is in truth required. What does science know of comets, their genesis, growth, and ultimate behavior? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And what is there so impossible that a lyre center, a lump of cosmic protoplasm, homogeneous and latent, when suddenly animated or fired up, should rush from its bed in space and whirl throughout the abyssal depths in order to strengthen its homogeneous organism by an accumulation and addition of differentiated elements? And why should not such a comet settle in life, live, and become an inhabited globe? The abodes of Fohat are many, it is said. He places his 4 fiery electropositive suns in the 4 circles. These circles are the equator, the ecliptic, and the 2 parallels of declination, or the tropics, to preside over the climates of which are placed the 4 mystical entities. Then again, other 7 suns are commissioned to preside over the 7 hot and 7 cold lokas, the hells of the orthodox Brahmins, at the 2 ends of the egg of matter, our earth and its poles. The 7 lokas are also called the rings elsewhere, and the circles. The ancients made the polar circles 7 instead of 2, as Europeans do, for Mount Meru, which is the North Pole, is said to have 7 gold and 7 silver steps leading to it. The strange statement made in one of the stanzas, the songs of Fohat and his sons were radiant as the noontide sun and the moon combined, and that the 4 songs of the middle fourfold circle saw their father's songs and heard his solar Selenic radiance is explained in the commentary in these words. The agitation of the Fohatic forces at the 2 cold ends, north and south poles, of the earth, which resulted in a multicolored radiance at night, have in them several of the properties of Akasha, ether, color and sound as well. Sound is the characteristic of Akasha, ether. It generates air, the property of which is touch, which, by friction, becomes productive of color and light. From Vishnu Purana. Perhaps the above will be regarded as archaic nonsense, but it will be better comprehended if the reader remembers the aurora borealis and australis, both of which take place at the very centers of terrestrial electric and magnetic forces. The 2 poles are said to be the storehouses, the receptacles and liberators at the same time of cosmic and terrestrial vitality, electricity, from the surplus of which the earth, had it not been for these 2 natural safety valves, would have been rent to pieces long ago. At the same time, it is now a theory that has lately become an axiom that the phenomenon of polar light is accompanied by and productive of strong sounds like whistling, hissing, and cracking. But see Professor Trumholt's works on the aurora borealis and his correspondence regarding this moot question. Stanza 6 continued. 7. Make thy calculations, Ulanu, if thou wouldst learn the correct age of thy small wheel, chain. Its 4th spoke is our mother, Earth. The small wheel is our chain of spheres, and the 4th spoke is our Earth, the 4th in the chain. It is one of those on which the hot, positive breath of the sun has a direct effect. Note, the 7 fundamental transformations of the globes or heavenly spheres, or rather of their constituent particles of matter, is described as follows. 1. The homogeneous. 2. The aeriform and radiant, gaseous. 3. Curd-like, nebulous. 4. Atomic, ethereal, beginning of motion, hence of differentiation. 5. Germinal, fiery, differentiated, but composed of the germs only of the elements in their earliest states, they having 7 states, when completely developed, on our earth. 6. Fourfold, vapory, the future earth. 7. Cold and depending on the sun for life and light. End of note. To calculate its age, however, as the pupil is asked to do in the stanza, is rather difficult, since we are not given the figures of the great Kalpa, and are not allowed to publish those of our small yugas, except as to the approximate duration of these. The old wheels rotated for 1 eternity, and 1/2 of an eternity, it says. We know that by eternity, the 7th part of 311,040,000,000,000 of years, or an age of Brahma, is meant. But what of that? We also know that, to begin with, if we take for our basis the above figures, we have first of all to eliminate from the 100 years of Brahma, or 311,040,000,000,000 years, 2 years taken up by the Sandhyas, twilights, which leaves 98. As we have to bring it to the mystical combination 14/7. But we have no knowledge at what time precisely the evolution and formation of our little earth began. Therefore it is impossible to calculate its age unless the time of its birth is given, which the teachers refuse to do so far. At the close of this book and in Book 2, however, some chronological hints will be given. We must remember, moreover, that the law of analogy holds good for the worlds as it does for man, and that as the one deity becomes 2, diva or angel, and 2 becomes 3, or man, etc., etc., so we are taught that the curds, world stuff, become wanderers, comets, these become stars, and the stars the centers of vortices, our sun and planets, to put it briefly. Note: this cannot be so very unscientific, since Descartes thought also that the planets rotate on their axis because they were once lucid stars, the centers of vortices. End of note. Reach the fourth fruit, or the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. There are 4 grades of initiation mentioned in exoteric works, which are known respectively in Sanskrit as Skrochapanna, Sagardagan, Anagamin, and Arhan, the 4 paths to nirvana, in this our 4th round, bearing the same appellations. The Arhan, though he can see the past, the present, and the future, is not yet the highest initiate, for the adept himself, the initiated candidate, becomes chela, pupil, to a higher initiate. 3 further higher grades have to be conquered by the Arhan, who would reach the apex of the ladder of arhatship. There are those who have reached it, even in this 5th race of ours, but the faculties necessary for the attainment of these higher grades will be fully developed in the average ascetic only at the end of this route race, and in the 6th and 7th. Thus there will always be initiates, and the profane till the end of this minor manvantara, the present life cycle. The arhats of the fire mist of the 7th rung are but one remove from the root base of their hierarchy, the highest on earth, and our terrestrial chain. This root base has a name which can only be translated by several compound words into English: the ever-living human banyan. This wondrous being descended from a high region, they say, in the early part of the 3rd age, before the separation of the sexes of the 3rd race. This 3rd race is sometimes called collectively the sons of passive yoga, that is, it was produced unconsciously by the 2nd race, which, as it was intellectually inactive, is supposed to have been constantly plunged in a kind of blank or abstract contemplation, as required by the conditions of the yoga state. In the first or earlier portion of the existence of the 3rd race, while it was yet in the state of purity, the sons of wisdom who, as will be seen, incarnated in this 3rd race, produced by Kriya Shakti a progeny called the sons of Ad, or of the fire mist, the sons of will and yoga, etc. They were a conscious production, as a portion of the race was already animated with the divine spark of spiritual superior intelligence. It was not a race, this progeny. It was at first a wondrous being called the Initiator, and after him a group of semi-divine and semi-human beings, set apart in archaic Genesis for certain purposes. They are those in whom are said to have incarnated the highest Dhyanis, Munis and Rishis from previous Manvantaras, to form the nursery for future human adepts on this earth and during the present cycle. These sons of will and yoga, born, so to speak, in an immaculate way, remained, it is explained, entirely apart from the rest of mankind. The being just referred to, which has to remain nameless, is the tree from which, in subsequent ages, all the great historically known sages and hierophants, such as the Rishi Kapila, Hermes, Enoch, Orpheus, etc., etc., have branched off. As objective man, he is the mysterious to the profane, the ever-invisible, yet ever-present personage about whom legends are rife in the East, especially among the occultists and the students of the sacred science. It is he who changes form, yet remains ever the same, and it is he again who holds spiritual sway over the initiated adepts throughout the whole world. He is, as said, the nameless one, who has so many names, and yet whose names and whose very nature are unknown. He is the initiator, called the Great Sacrifice, For, sitting at the threshold of light, he looks into it from within the circle of darkness, which he will not cross, nor will he quit his post till the last day of this life cycle. Why does the solitary watcher remain at his self-chosen post? Why does he sit by the fountain of primeval wisdom, of which he drinks no longer, as he has naught to learn which he does not know, neither on this earth, nor in its heaven? Because the lonely, sore-footed pilgrims on their way back to their home are never sure to the last moment of not losing their way in the limitless desert of illusion and matter called earth life. Because he would fain show the way to that region of freedom and light, from which he is a voluntary exile himself, to every prisoner who has succeeded in liberating himself from the bonds of flesh and illusion. Because, in short, he has sacrificed himself for the sake of mankind, though but a few elect may profit by the great sacrifice. It is under the direct, silent guidance of this Maha, great Guru, that all the other less divine teachers and instructors of mankind became, from the first awakening of human consciousness, the guides of early humanity. It is through these sons of God that infant humanity got its first notions of all the arts and sciences, as well as of spiritual knowledge, and it is they who have laid the first foundation stone of those ancient civilizations that puzzle so sorely our modern generation of students and scholars. Note: let those who doubt this statement explain the mystery of the extraordinary knowledge possessed by the ancients, alleged to have developed from lower and animal-like savages, the cavemen of the Paleolithic age, on any other equally reasonable grounds. Let them turn to such works as those of Vitruvius Pollio of the Augustan age, on architecture for instance, in which all the rules of proportions are those taught anciently at initiations, if he would acquaint himself with the truly divine art, and understand the deep esoteric significance hidden in every rule and law of proportion. No man descended from a Paleolithic cave-dweller could ever evolve such a science unaided, even in millenniums of thought and intellectual evolution. It is the pupils of those incarnated rishis and devas of the third root race who handed their knowledge from one generation to another, to Egypt and Greece, with its now lost canon of proportion, as it is the disciples of the initiates of the fourth, the Atlanteans, who handed it over to their Cyclops, the sons of Cycles, or from the infinite, from whom the name passed to the still later generations of Gnostic priests. It is owing to the divine perfection of those architectural proportions that the ancients could build those wonders of the subsequent ages, their fanes, pyramids, cave temples, cromlechs, cairns, altars, proving they had the powers of machinery and a knowledge of mechanics to which modern skill is like a child's play, and which that skill refers to itself as the works of hundred-handed giants. See Book of God, Kinnelly. Modern architects may not altogether have neglected those rules, but they have superadded enough empirical innovations to destroy those just proportions. It is Vitruvius who gave to posterity the rules of construction to the Grecian temples erected to the immortal gods, and the 10 books of Marcus Vitruvius Pollio on architecture of one, in short, who was an initiate, can only be studied esoterically. The Druidical circles, the dolmen, the temples of India, Egypt and Greece, the towers and the 127 towns in Europe which were found Cyclopean in origin by the French Institute, are all the work of initiated priest architects, the descendants of those primarily taught by the sons of God, justly called the builders. This is what appreciative posterity says to those descendants. They used neither mortar nor cement, nor steel, nor iron to cut the stones with, and yet they were so artfully wrought that in many places the joints are not seen, though many of the stones, as in Peru, are 18 feet thick, and in the walls of the fortress of Cusco there are stones of a still greater size, Acosta 6:14. Again, the walls of Syene, built 5,400 years ago, when that spot was exactly under the tropic, which it has now ceased to be, were so constructed that at noon, at the precise moment of the solar solstice, the entire disk of the sun was seen reflected on their surface, a work which the united skill of all the astronomers of Europe would not now be able to effect. From Kinley, Book of God. End of note. Although these matters were barely hinted at in Isis Unveiled, it will be well to remind the reader of what was said in Volume 1, pages 587 to 593, concerning a certain sacred island in Central Asia, and to refer him for further details to the chapter in Book 2 on the sons of God and the sacred island. A few more explanations, however, though thrown out in a fragmentary form, may help the student to obtain a glimpse into the present mystery. To state at least one detail concerning these mysterious sons of God in plain words, it is from them, these Brahmaputras, that the high Dvijas, the initiated Brahmins of old justly claimed descent, while the modern Brahmin would have the lowest castes believe literally that they were issued direct from the mouth of Brahma. This is the esoteric teaching, which adds moreover that, although these descendants, spiritually of course, from the sons of will and yoga, became in time divided into opposite sexes, as their Kriya Shakti progenitors did themselves later on, yet even their degenerate descendants have down to the present day retained veneration and respect for the creative function, and still regard it in the light of a religious ceremony, whereas the more civilized nations consider it as a mere animal function. Compare the Western views and practice in these matters with the institutions of Manu in regard to the laws of Grihastha and married life. The true Brahmin is thus indeed he whose 7 forefathers have drunk the juice of the moon plant, Soma, and whose a Trishuparna, for he has understood the secret of the Vedas. And to this day, such Brahmins know that, during its early beginnings, psychic and physical intellect being dormant and consciousness still undeveloped, the spiritual conceptions of that race were quite unconnected with its physical surroundings. That divine man dwelt in his animal, though externally human, form, and, if there was instinct in him, no self-consciousness came to enlighten the darkness of the latent fifth principle. When moved by the law of evolution, the laws of wisdom infused into him the spark of consciousness, the first feeling it awoke to life and activity was a sense of solidarity, of oneness with his spiritual creators. As the child's first feeling is for its mother and nurse, so the first aspirations of the awakening consciousness in primitive man were for those whose element he felt within himself, and who yet were outside and independent of him. Devotion arose out of that feeling, and became the first and foremost motor in his nature, for it is the only one which is natural in our heart, which is innate in us, and which we find alike in human babe and the young of the animal. This feeling of irrepressible, instinctive aspiration in primitive man is beautifully, and one may say intuitionally, described by Carlyle. The great antique heart, he exclaims, how like a child's in its simplicity, like a man's in its earnest solemnity and depth. Heaven lies over him wheresoever he goes or stands on the earth, making all the earth a mystic temple to him, the earth's business all a kind of worship. Glimpses of bright creatures flash in the common sunlight. Angels yet hover, doing God's messages among men. Wonder, miracle, encompass the man. He lives in an element of miracle, a great law of duty, high as these two infinitudes, heaven and hell, dwarfing all else, annihilating all else. It was reality, and it is one. The garment only of it is dead. The essence of it lives through all times and all eternity. Note: that which was natural in the sight of primitive man has become only now miracle to us, and that which was to him a miracle could never be expressed in our language. End of note. It lives undeniably and has settled in all its ineradicable strength and power in the Asiatic Aryan heart from the third race, direct through its first mind-born sons, the fruits of Kriya Shakti. As time rolled on, the holy caste of initiates produced but rarely, and from age to age, such perfect creatures, being apart inwardly, though the same as those who produced them outwardly. While in the infancy of the third primitive race, a creature of a more exalted kind was wanting yet, and therefore was designed, conscious of thought, of more capacious breast, for empire formed and fit to rule the rest. It was called into being, a ready and perfect vehicle for the incarnating denizens of higher spheres, who took forthwith their abodes in these forms, both born of spiritual will and the natural divine power in man. It was a child of pure spirit, mentally unalloyed with any tincture of earthly element. Its physical frame alone was of time and of life, as it drew its intelligence direct from above. It was the living tree of divine wisdom, and may therefore be likened to the mundane tree of the Norse legend, which cannot wither and die until the last battle of life shall be fought, while its roots are gnawed all the time by the dragon Nidhogg. For even so, the first and holy son of Kriya Shakti had his body gnawed by the tooth of time, but the roots of his inner being remained forever undecaying and strong, because they grew and expanded in heaven, not on earth. He was the first of the first, and he was the seed of all the others. There were other sons of Kriya Shakti, produced by a second spiritual effort, but the first one had remained to this day the seed of divine knowledge, the one and the supreme among the terrestrial sons of wisdom. Of this subject we can say no more, except to add that in every age, even in our own, there have been great intellects who have understood the problem correctly. How comes our physical body to the state of perfection it is found in now? Through millions of years of evolution, of course, yet never through or from animals as taught by materialism. For, as Carlyle says, the essence of our being, the mystery in us that calls itself I. What words have we for such things? It is a breath of heaven. The highest being reveals himself in man. This body, these faculties, this life of ours, it is not all as a vesture for the unnamed. Unquote, from Carlyle. The breath of heaven, or rather the breath of life, called in the Bible Nephesh, is in every animal, in every animate speck, as in every mineral atom, but none of these has, like man, the consciousness of the nature of that highest being, as none has that divine harmony in its form which man possesses. Note: there is no nation in the world in which the feeling of devotion or of religious mysticism is more developed and prominent than in the Hindu people. See what Max Müller says of this idiosyncrasy, a national feature in his works. This is direct inheritance from the primitive conscious men of the third race. End of note. It is, as Novalis said, and no one since has said it better, as repeated by Carlyle. There is but one temple in the universe, and that is the body of man. Nothing is holier than that high form. We touch heaven when we lay our hand on a human body. This sounds like a more flourish of rhetoric, adds Carlyle, but it is not so. If well meditated, it will turn out to be a scientific fact, the expression of the actual truth of the thing. We are the miracle of miracles, the great inscrutable mystery. Next chapter is Stanza 7.